Very quick forward before we begin, but I have a cold, and I had a cold when I recorded this video, and I'm gonna sound a little bit stilted. I'm not gonna sound my best, but shut up, you're gonna deal with it. You're gonna watch this video. Young Jedi Adventures is a show that started in 2023 that follows 3 Jedi younglings 200 years before the Phantom Menace in the High Republic era, helping out the people of the galaxy with minimal adult supervision. You don't actually need to know all that much about this show, and that's not going to be the focus of this video. And I'm glad for that, as this is one of the few Star Wars shows I have not yet seen in its entirety. But what's important to know is that you cannot talk about this show in Star Wars Online space without someone immediately mentioning that the show ends, or hope it ends, with Order 66 and the 3 protagonists being murdered by Darth Vader in Operation Nightfall. This is one of the most prevalent jokes I've seen in recent years in the Star Wars fandom, and just to get it out of the way, no, this is not real, as it takes 200 years prior to Anakin's birth. There is absolutely no way this could be a true part of the show, nor will it ever be. However, I bring it up because this has actually happened. Not in the whole Anakin murdering the main cast of Young Jedi Adventures, but in the idea that a young children's Star Wars show has taken a drastically darker tonal shift in its finale. It sounds like an impossible concept, and yes, it is. I am heavily stretching the definition of what a finale is for my own selfish and devilish goals, but today I want to talk about Ewoks. I don't think this is going to be a terribly long video, but I need to tell more people about this. I know the kind of content I produce doesn't exactly make this obvious, but I am a man on a quest. And that quest is to consume every single piece of media in all of Star Wars, across canon, legends, and non-canon. I've gotten pretty far into this, and I've consumed more than half of the entire media franchise, but that's not what this video is about. If you do want to know more, you can ask me on my Discord. This is all to set up the real point of this video, and that is that I had recently fully watched every single television episode in the Legends continuity. When I say that, some of you probably already have a few things that come to mind. Clone Wars, The Clone Wars. Actually, that's probably about it. Maybe shows like Rebels or The Mandalorian or Visions if you have no idea what the Legends continuity actually is. Some of you may even think that you too have already watched every show in the Legends continuity. And although I don't doubt that some of you probably have, the 2 shows I watched to complete this list are 2 shows I am certain 99% of Star Wars fans have never seen, a majority of whom have likely never even heard of these before, those being the first 2 Star Wars television shows ever produced. Before The Mandalorian, before The Clone Wars, before even the prequels, or the reconstruction of the Star Wars Expanded Universe with the release of Heir to the Empire, was 1985's 2 animated Star Wars shows, Droids, The Adventures of R2-D2 and C-3PO, and Ewoks. I hate to say it, but I actually can't recommend either of these that much. I am truly sorry to the stans of these 2 shows, but they were both created for a much younger demographic than I am, and I'm not too big of a fan of shows that don't follow a larger plot anyway. Droids I had a much bigger issue with than I did with Ewoks. The plot changes every 4 episodes, and although compared to Ewoks it had much larger overarching arcs, these arcs tended to focus on a few very weak characters, while the 2 main characters that the show is named after didn't really do all that much. The Great Heat was pretty cool though. Like the guy, not the film. But if you saw the thumbnail, which you did, you know that show's not what I want to talk about. I'm more interested in its sister show, Ewoks, which is set 100 years in the future from Droids? Okay, 1 second. No, I wish I had time to talk about that. That's a really interesting subject, but that actually has nothing to do with what I want to talk about in this video. I'm just gonna ignore it for now. Ewoks is a show that takes place almost entirely on the forest moon of Endor and focuses on 4 members of Bright Tree Village: Wicket, Nissa, Teebo, and Latara. The 2 male characters, Wicket and Teebo, you probably remember from Return of the Jedi. Wicket being a major character, and Teebo being right here. The female characters, on the other hand, did not make an appearance in the film. Nisa first appearing in a young reader's book, while Atara was created for the show. Across the show's 2-season runtime, it follows the group in their adventures across the moon, encountering various flora, fauna, and fighting against the forces of Morag and King Gornish. Major spoiler warning for Ewoks from this point on, for all 3 of you who are now somehow interested in this show based on that, but this show does not have much of an overarching plot. The only events that really have any lasting effects on the show is the fusing of the Sunstar and the Shadowstone into one piece, and the death of Morag. Outside of that, nothing really happens much in this show after each episode's 20 minutes are up. What I will applaud this show on in comparison to Droids is the fact that it is unapologetically Ewoks. A not terribly technologically advanced civilization that lives off the land. In a vacuum, this doesn't sound that crazy, but for a Star Wars show, that's a pretty major achievement in sticking to its concepts and not heavily referencing the major plot and art direction of the rest of the entire franchise. It started the club between it, Resistance, and Endor to be the only 3 Star Wars shows to not contain a lightsaber, and although later retconned to include it, it is the only show between it and Droids to not include a depiction or reference to the Force. But then they made magic the Force, so this is all kind of the Force too, you know what I mean. Speaking of the retcon that made magic a form of the Force, with the Force in mind, there are some really crazy connotations this show adds to the series as a whole about the Force. There's this one character who manages to control a whole host of rocks and attack several figures with them for years, while the user himself was on the other side of the moon and potentially unconscious. Later, this figure, the Rock Wizard, would open up huge cracks in the ground solely through the Force, making this, oddly enough, one of the most powerful depictions of the Force we've ever seen on screen, right up next to Palpatine's Force Storm in The Rise of Skywalker and Starkiller's Star Destroyer pull. And this was the Rock Wizard perhaps unconsciously moving against circus performers that he believes gave him tooth pain. Imagine what this wizard might have been able to do against a real threat. Please tell me how this man power scales up to Vader. I think he wins! There are also some really crazy Force artifacts here, like a wand that controls all seasons on the planet, of course, controlled by 4 season-themed monarchs, a rock that can open up wormholes by moving moons, a ring that turns people into totem poles and also your slaves. And although not a part of the show Ewoks, I do need to bring up that the film Battle of Endor introduces a ring that turns you into a bird. That is a very, very important part of the lore. Anyway, getting back to the main point of the video, Ewoks is also a show that across all of its 26 episodes only has 1 appearance of the Empire, where Wicket conveniently saves the life of Emperor Palpatine, in spite of the fact that the show was placed right before Return of the Jedi and that the second Death Star should have been pretty far into construction at this point. All this to say, Ewoks was not interested in making a Star Wars show. It was interested in making an Ewok show, and I applaud that. But to actually get to the real point of this video, you don't need to know any of that. What you really need to know is that this show was intended for very young children. No antagonist is killed off in any way that doesn't involve them falling down a pit or dying through some form of magic. Typically, the plots are drawn out and benign. There's an entire episode of Wicket going to a haunted house and getting too scared. The demographic here is clearly toddlers, which is why I personally can't recommend it much to an older audience unless you yourself have kids to watch it with. Now in 1986, by the end of season 2, the show would release its final episode ever, what you've all been waiting for, Milani the Warrior. Which, at first glance, does not seem like a series or even a season finale. The episode surrounds Wicket falling for an older Ewok warrior named Charita, while the younger Milani, who has already been in love with Wicket from the start, gets jealous and then swindled by 2 elephants into a plot that she believes will make her appear to be a warrior and therefore attractive to Wicket, but accidentally she just gives away the Ewok's most powerful and worshipped artifact to a couple of elephants who attempt to use it to turn the entire moon into mud before they're thwarted. Pretty par for the course for an Ewoks episode, but a bit disappointing for the finale of the series, especially in comparison to their more bombastic episodes like Sunstar vs. Shadowstone, Battle for the Sunstar, and the previous season finale, Asha. In spite of this, Ewoks would end there after 2 years and its 2-season run, slowly becoming a long-forgotten piece of the Star Wars franchise as it began to expand and grow larger than it ever was before. That is until 2013. 10 months after Disney's purchase of Star Wars, 6 months before the decanonization of the expanded universe, 27 years after the end of Ewoks, the comic Shadows of Endor would release, acting, in all practical sense, as the true end to the Ewoks cartoon show, following the main cast of the show and their first encounter with mass Imperial presence on the forest moon of Endor. The comic begins with a much taller, edgier, hotter Teebo, a design more in line with Return of the Jedi, along with many other designs across this comic. The wizard Logray's apprentice, who we last saw in Ewoks setting up a nice party to celebrate the arrival of a prince, is now cleaving into a dragon's leg with an axe. As blood begins to coat Teebo's hand, it is very clear that something has changed in the tone of the story. A bit after that, we get our first look at some of the conflicts between the Ewoks, led by Chief Chirpa, and the Duloks, led by King Gornish. Let me first go back a second, just to reiterate what this conflict looks like in the show Ewoks. In one of the earlier episodes of the show, the Duloks break in the Bright Tree Village with one goal: to steal some soap from the Ewoks, so that bugs attack them less. In the village, they find a bar of soap, but eventually discover that this isn't normal soap. It's soap that turns you invisible. Knowing now that they have the ability to make themselves completely invisible, they choose to invade the Ewok village and do whatever they want without being discovered. With this ability, they waste some food, and they make an Ewok fall over. In another episode, the Duloks stalk the lands across Bright Tree Village, and once they find a lone young Ewok in the woods, they strike by taking them back to the Dulok village and making her watch over some of the queen's children in her stead. The Duloks build a battleship and acquire an Ewok war wagon and try to use both against the Ewoks, and in both cases, the vehicle is destroyed before they even get a chance to do anything to any Ewok. This group is in no way any threat to any Ewok. This is a group of Toms in a world of Jerrys. Anyway, back to Shadows of Endor. When a Dulok with a recently severed arm makes his way into Bright Tree Village with a warning, he is captured, and Chief Chirpa immediately remarks, "Duloks are gutted on sight and not brought into my home." Clearly, relationships have changed in the past 2 days. The Dulok, Aglok, rejects the notion that he is a threat and warns Chirpa that the entire Dulok village has been destroyed by the Empire and their people enslaved. There is a solid chance here that King Gornish may just be fucking dead. Rest in peace to a real one. In spite of the potential death of the Dulok people, Chirpa imprisons Aglok, but is swiftly freed by Wicket, Nisa, and Paplu. And Ewok, for some unknowable reason, has completely stolen Teebo's personality and job from the Ewok show, and Teebo, in turn, has stolen a few of Paplu's traits. There's probably a reasonable and well thought out explanation for this, but that would require work. Anyway, the group escapes with Aglok to try and return him to the Dulok village to confirm his word, with Paplu being taken down by Logray in an attempt to stop the party. On the way, they regroup with Teebo and Latara, with Teebo being reluctant to journey with the Dulok. Eventually, the group reaches the former Dulok village, now an Imperial outpost, where a large group of Duloks have been rounded up and set to be massacred. In response to this crisis, the group chooses to set aside their differences for the greater good to save the Duloks, and Aglok is freed, which is immediately tested as Aglok gets his hands on an E11 and threatens the group with his vastly superior weaponry while the Ewoks worry about a dying Wisty Aglok is using as a lantern. Meanwhile, while the Ewoks are debating whether or not to betray Aglok and free the Wisty, Logray gets into a sick-ass wizard duel with the Night Sister Carol before Poplu accidentally activates her wizard ring and she turns into a bird. This is not important to the plot at all, but I need to talk about that ring. I need to let you know there is a ring in the Star Wars universe that turns you into a bird as much as I possibly can. This is an essential piece of Star Wars lore that Lucasfilm has been trying to hide from you for years, and I am opening your eyes to what is truly possible. It's a ring that turns you into a bird! Anyway, the group decides to betray Aglok while he's sleeping and steals the key around his chest that opens up the Wisty cage. However, he wakes up during this and immediately tries to shoot Wicket down. Chasing him down in a dark cave with a smoking gun, Aglok almost gets Wicket, if not for the fact that an unseeable ancient beast of the depths grabs Aglok and tears him limb from limb. Oh my god. The now only Ewok group manages to barely escape the beast and escape the cave, and with their freedom, brutally murders a group of stormtroopers marching the chained Duloks to their death. It is an indescribable feeling to give you in just this YouTube video, to have watched 9 hours and read 14 comics of Care Bear walking through the woods helping make the world a better place with the power of friendship, and seen one of those characters straddling a stormtrooper to bury an axe in their chest and another holding a rifle as large as they are to gun down soldiers in the wilderness. I don't know how to tell you how to feel. While this brutal display of carnage is being performed by these children's show characters, the beast that has been following the group, the Griag, third parties the attack, leading to Latara, again, a character created for a children's show meant for toddlers and young children, getting shot down by a stormtrooper. She lives the attack and goes on to take down more of the Griag's many heads, but for a second there, I was certain this comic was going to kill her off to explain her absence in Return of the Jedi. The comic ends with the Griag being defeated through a noble sacrifice of the Ewok's most valuable and powerful possession, the Sun Star, and the Ewok gang being rewarded for their actions, Tebow in particular, who is rewarded with the rank of warrior. I know this probably doesn't seem like a lot to you. There's a very low chance that you were there, that you were living in the spiral, but I was. And this comic came out of nowhere for me. The audacity for a comic like this to be created as a much darker end to the Ewok television show and opening up the door to the Ewok duology and eventually Return of the Jedi was such a risky but very cool and well executed idea that perfectly ties up the Ewok cinematic universe at the end of Legends. The art, done by the author Zach Jalungo, is some of the best this franchise has ever seen, and strikes a solid balance between cute and serious in this very odd, unnatural context. But it works really, really well, and it's a massive shame that he's never illustrated an in-universe story for Star Wars since. I'd highly recommend this comic for everyone watching. Not just for the beauty of connecting all of these stories that very few people have even seen in a stunning fashion, but as a cool introduction into this more obscure part of the EU, and for the beautiful art. I don't really know how to end this video. Based on like most of my videos, I typically shout very loudly at the end,